Hey, you guys, and welcome to this week's edition of the Pantry Chat Food for Thought. This week, we are talking with special guest David Stelzer from Azure Standard. So I'm really excited. We're going to be talking with him, but we're really going to be diving into a beginner's guide to buying food in bulk. This is just such an important topic and something that Josh and I have done for years. And it has saved us so many times, saved us trips to the grocery store, saved us money, saved us time. And just, it always feels great to know that you have a good supply of food in your home, ready for you whenever you need it. So today we're going to be speaking to David. He's the founder and CEO of Azure Standard. David began farming organically as a teenager in the 1970s with a passion for providing truly healthful foods grown without conventional chemical inputs. Yay! From small beginnings selling grain grown on the family farm, he founded Azure Standard in 1987 as a way to market not only what he grew, but other products that were being requested by his customers. One attribute that sets David apart from many others is his willingness to do hard things. Sounds like a homesteader, huh? The saying, when there's a will, there's a way, easily applies to David, since he has a knack for finding unique solutions to problems and then earnestly working to make that happen even when it's not easy. This has helped him to earn the respect and admiration of his family, the Azure team, and so many others, including Josh and I, who just have absolutely loved what he has created and provided and have been using Azure Standard for our own family for, I think we might be at about 18 years now that we have been using Azure Standard to buy bulk and even some just hard to find non-bulk items. But this driving desire for action comes from something deeper than just making a living for David. His motivation comes from a personal passion to share healthful living with others. And David, that has added so much to the rest of us who now have access to something that it can be really hard to find locally across the country, which is healthful food. So welcome. Thank you for coming on today.
Well, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So when you were a child, you had some health issues. How did that affect you and drive you to get to where you are now? Why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, truthfully, my health issues were more my parents' problem than mine at that time. But my earliest memories in life are laying on the couch wondering if I could get another breath. It was, very, it was very lung issues primarily in those early years. And my parents had gone to the doctors. They said pretty much, there was some drugs and inhalers and various things, and maybe I would survive, but chances were I would have a relatively short life. And that was, because I was just born with some kind of defect, I guess. But they weren't willing to listen to that, and so they actually started looking at alternative medicine. I finally ended up finding a naturopath up in Spokane area, actually, that correctly identified what my issue was, which was basically that I was born with a microbiome that did not digest animal products, and particularly dairy products. They were just being absolutely destroying my body because they weren't being digested at all. So I ended up going on a completely dairy-free diet first, and I began to improve. But I am pretty much on a vegan diet at this point and have been for my whole life. And I don't necessarily recommend it because if you have a healthy microbiome, I am not at all saying that to copy I have to do a lot of extra things because of that. But it got me, and I'm, because of that sensitivity, I'm also very sensitive to chemicals and preservatives and all that kind of stuff. I have to be extremely careful with that. So clean eating and became extremely important to me. Um, and so I realize that those kinds of things are not healthy for anybody. I'm saying I don't necessarily recommend a vegan diet because I, most people actually can utilize animal products very well. But I do recommend a diet free of agricultural chemicals, preservatives, all the different chemicals that end up in your food supply on a regular basis. That is the best for everyone. And that is what Azure has really been dedicated to providing, is food products that are, free of all that, all that stuff. and and even more importantly than in many cases is when food is grown correctly, then you have the actual nutrients that our body needs in the food. And that's the key to really healthy living. When we're able to get everything we need from the food without eating so much that we become grossly overweight or, you know, um, almost incapacitated. And that is the problem many times, is in order to get enough nutrients, we eat so many carbs or so much sugar, so much, and we're still hungry because we're looking for these other nutrients. We don't need
Mhm.
any more, you know, empty carbs. We need minerals, probably is the biggest thing. Okay, there's the little pitch on that.
No, I love it on the health side there. And, this is, I think so many people identify with your story. Thank goodness for parents who don't accept medical, prognosis from the doctor, right? And just go, hey, we're not going that way. We're going to find some different answers. And so many people that we hear from here in the pantry chat that I interview have that exact same story of just like, I was told that I was crazy, that I wasn't really sick, or that, there was no hope for me, or I was going to have to stay on this medication lifelong. And it was those people who said, I just don't accept that. I believe that bodies can heal, or we can work with our bodies to find healthy solutions to make our bodies be able to function well, even in a fallen and broken state. And so yay for just parents who just said, no, we're going to find a better answer than that because we just don't believe that answer. Um, so I think that's really encouraging for people, though, to hear, is that, we can find answers. And maybe it doesn't look like everybody else's diet, like you're saying, vegan may not be for everybody, but it's working for you and it keeps you healthy and well. And so it's like, that's kind of the bottom line, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Feeling.
there is a lot of variation, um, with what people need, as far as some of it's from our heritage, the microbiome that we got from our mother primarily. There's a lot of variables with that. So what's good for one person isn't necessarily, you see online all these little things. Oh, these three foods that are toxic, but they're considered health foods or something. Well, they might be toxic to some person with exactly the wrong microbiome. If I were writing that based on my experience, I could say, oh, you know, dairy is absolutely toxic. Well, it is toxic to me, but it may not be toxic to you. And it was interesting when my wife and I first got married. She says, "Oh well," she says, "I kind of like eating this the way that you eat. Let's just eat that way. Let's just eat basically vegan." And you know what? It wasn't very long, and she actually got quite sick because her microbiome cannot digest appropriately purely plant-based food to be able to get enough protein, and she ended up quite anemic. And um, you know, she started breaking out with rashes, just really weird things. And so we we started looking, what's causing all this? I mean, this is weird. She was eating not very clean really before, and but then we had to get on that journey. Yes, she has a different microbiome. She needs a certain amount of animal animal based food, because unless she's completely going to rejuvenate that microbiome, which is a very hard thing to do, um, she actually needs to have animal based food. So we now eat slightly differently. She, the basic meal's the same, but she adds the hamburger and stuff, and I leave it out, right? It's like,
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of families out there who identify with that because they have somebody in the family who needs to be gluten-free or needs to be dairy-free or some of these different things. And so they're always kind of shaping and tweaking. How do we make this work for everybody? So, well, it's amazing to me that you took those challenges and you use them as an impetus to get to where you are now as a CEO and founder of Azure Standard, which is such a benefit to so many other people around the country. I know you guys have faced some challenges, Azure Standard, over probably since COVID is really where I became aware of them. Do you guys have any big changes here happening with Azure at this point or anything going on?
well, we always have a lot going on here at Azure. Yes, you know, anytime you do something worthwhile, we face challenges, especially if it's not something that a lot of people do all the time. Between, you know, government regulations, which are built for the norm, and um, the knowledge out, that's available. Um, it's mostly, for people that do normal things. So when you get outside the norm, we always face a certain amount of challenges. So, and I'm not necessarily saying challenges in a good or a bad way. We've had plenty of both.
Yeah.
But anything that's worth doing um, is worth persevering to do. And so, yeah, Azure's dedicated to just, adding to that the amount of stuff that we're able to offer that's healthy, that's clean, that's at a good value for our customers. That's one of the things that's very important to me, is especially for, larger families. Um, you know, we um, we have 11 children, so that was quite a bit of food at one stage in our life. They're mostly grown now. I only have the last three at home, but they're you can't afford to do and raise a large family um, just buying the health food store type stuff. And so that became a real focus for Azure, probably the last 30 years or so, is to offer these healthy options in bulk at a reduced price. And we can do that typically at a reduced price. You're going to be able to buy um, organic oatmeal in a 25-pound bag for the same price or cheaper than you could buy conventional oatmeal in, Quaker Oat canisters or whatever,
Yeah.
fill in the blank there. Um, and and for anyone who's trying to feed their family on a budget, we want to make available the healthier options, because especially when you're raising a family, the temptation is very real to try to cheapen the food budget. Um, there's nothing wrong with cheapening the food budget. Just don't buy cheap food, because
That's a good way to say it.
it's I can tell you what, food bills don't add up anything like medical bills do. I'll tell you that right now. And not only the medical bills, but the loss of productivity for um, being ill.
Yeah.
There is no amount of money that you can ever spend on food that would equal um, poor health. And
Yeah.
so don't take that temptation, but Azure tries to give you the best of both worlds. And of course, I strongly advocate growing a garden as well. That's a great way to help out on the budget, and you know exactly how it's grown if you do it yourself.
Josh and I often talk back to his grandfather who lived into his 90s, very, very healthy, never on any medication. And, but we would watch what he was eating, especially after he became a widower. And he was like, every Tuesday I eat at Jack in the Box, and every Wednesday he went to the pizza place. And, it was just this food that was awful. And we go, how is he doing this? How is he surviving like this? Well, come to find out, for, so many years of his upbringing, they lived on a dairy farm.
Hmm.
He was eating food straight out of the garden, straight out of the milk cow. Like, he was eating this amazing food all through his childhood. And we often think to ourselves how important it is to get that foundation of a healthy childhood in, with just that really, really good nutrition into their bodies, because that momentum can actually carry you an extremely long way through life, even if you have moments where you're, eating the college cafeteria food, or maybe don't feel like cooking as you get older and decide to go to fast food instead. That momentum that you gain from a youth of health is just something you can never make up again, I don't think.
And
So,
it is an unfair advantage when we look at it. We raised 11 children, and we only had one at a doctor ever, and that was a broken femur. Um, we raised 11 children without any of them ever even seeing a doctor. They had, oh, what's your practitioner when we had a broken femur? Oh, never had one, you know, and we never did for any of our children because they never went. They never had to. Um, and they also have an unfair advantage otherwise too. My wife and I are both probably the world's worst athletes, I think. We're not athletic in the slightest. Um, all but I ended up with two sons that actually went all the way through college on athletic scholarships.
wow.
Well, one went all the way through, one went partway through, but because they had an unfair advantage,
Yeah.
they had healthier bodies, and they had a lot more endurance than in an athletic sense than all their competitors,
Hmm.
because they, you know, ate modern American diets for the most part,
Yeah.
and it makes a huge difference. And it's not, like I say, it wasn't genetics. They, it was the unfair advantage of having clean, healthy diets
Hmm.
growing up, and then they become, you know, world class, or national class college athletes. And it's like, hi,
It's
well, it
me.
is. It's that unfair advantage. So if
Yeah.
you're a parent and you want to give your kids an unfair advantage, not saying it'll be necessarily in athletics, it could be in a lot. Nutrition affects the brain as well.
Hmm.
You definitely see, um, Dr. Amen did a lot of research on that subject when it comes to children, and obviously use of the brain, exercise of the brain as well. But nutrition plays into cognitive skills very much, especially in children that are learning quickly. So never underestimate the value of food, even when you're talking about whether it's the athletic or the cognitive advantage. Uh, um, it's real.
Yeah. Well, let's take this moment, because I think A lot of people here listening totally believe that food is very valuable, but we have this reality that you kind of touched on. It's expensive to buy good food if you're going to maybe the little organic section in your grocery store and trying to buy some. That even then we have to question what is good food, right? Like, is organic enough? That just means there aren't poisons in there in the way of herbicides and pesticides. It doesn't really mean that there is nutrition back in that food. And so, finding really good food, if you're buying it in little packaging, in little bits, is really cost prohibitive, especially for most families, especially now that we're seeing inflation just go through the roof when it comes to food. So we really want to talk about buying food in bulk and how that can help us save money. But I want to preface this a little bit. Josh and I have been buying food in bulk for years. We started with Azure Standard probably back 18 years ago, and that's why it's so exciting to get to
Oh,
talk to you
awesome.
here in this journey and to be able to have this conversation with you. And we're not preppers. You guys know us here listening. We're not really preppers. We wouldn't claim that we're preppers. So we're not trying to stockpile, years and years worth of food in our basement or anything like that. But we do aim to have a full working pantry that has at least a year's worth of food. When the harvest comes in, the pantry should fill up for a year, and then we use it off, and then it should fill up again. And we use that same model for our bulk supplies too, that we want to be bringing it in, stocking up for at least a year, and then using it off. But I can remember back in those early days, we were so broke. And so starting by buying a big bag of something felt really unattainable, from going from a little, enough to get me through a week package to a big piece of it. There's kind of a first step that you have to take. And it's kind of positioning yourself to be able to start buying in bulk and changing your budget around a little bit. So before we really dive into the steps of how to do that, let's talk really quickly about why to buy in bulk. David, why would you say, what are the top reasons?
Well, number one is so that you have good food on hand to be able to cook at home and make healthy meals.
Yeah.
It's very easy to not have everything available, and then we have an excuse to go eat less than optimum cooked at home meals. That's number one of what we want to be able to avoid. And then, of course, number two is to be able to do it more cost effectively. And number three is also important, as far as being able to afford the higher quality food, uh, things like organic, you know, and as you point out, organic is what's not in the food, um, but organic does lend itself very well to having more in the food as well, because long term a farmer will go broke by just having things out of the food. As an organic farmer, you won't be able to survive if you don't end up with healthy, biodynamically rich soil. You might be able to do it for a year or two, but you will go down.
Yeah. Yeah. It's expensive to try to be organic without, it's cost prohibitive to try to be organic without actually improving your soil and actually doing things the right way. They can only do that for a few years before it doesn't work anymore and you just ruin your soil.
Right. So eventually, an organic farmer is either going to go back to conventional if he's just going by the rules of what's not in it,
Yeah.
or he's going to learn to farm biologically,
Yeah.
and that's what creates the nutrient density in the food.
Yeah. Great. Okay, so switching from buying just what we need, kind of just in time groceries. I was hearing the number the other day, and the average American has 3 days of food in their house. We know the average grocery store has about 3 days of food in it if everything's humming along normally and not, there's no panic buying or anything like that. So, most Americans are buying what they need for about 3 days worth of groceries. So this is a big change for people to say, let's go from buying a couple days worth, which that price tag looks really small, right? Because you're only like going to get a few days. And then all of a sudden you're switching and you're buying enough for a whole month. That price tag looks really big because you're looking at a bag, like a 25-pound bag of black beans instead of maybe a couple cups of, one of those bags that was like 1.5 pounds that you get from the grocery store. And you're like, gosh, that's only a couple dollars versus this bigger bag. How do you recommend people starting to make that change for their budgets when they're going from the small packaging to that big packaging?
Well, one thing at a time is, okay, it's going to last, that 25-pound bag of black beans might not be just a month's supply. Many times that could be 3 or 4 months supply. But always start with the things that you in your cooking habits use the most of.
Hmm.
So if you use a lot of beans, then certainly start with beans. Maybe it's rice, maybe it's oatmeal, you know, make, flour. If you bake a lot of bread in your house, start with buying a, 25 or pound bag of flour. Or um, everybody's a little bit different with the way that we eat. Even if we're eating healthy things, um, we tend to, eat a little bit different. At our house, the most common stuff is going to be a little bit different than at yours. At our house, they like a lot of like taco salad type food. So beans and rice are pretty high on the list, along with, olive oils and vinegars and a lot of seasonings. Those are, that's kind of our, shall we say, go to, you know, but, for somebody else, it could be totally different.
Hmm.
Um, so get the things that are, you know, a staple in your household first, and then start building from there. And hey, adding one thing, okay, let's say it's oats, and you're gonna spend $30 on a 25-pound bag of oats. Okay, it doesn't take a whole lot of, the little bags to add up to $30. We can at least afford that one thing. And that is one thing that Azure does as well, is offer small quantities of things. So if you do need to fill in, hey, on my budget, I can only afford to buy one bulk item. But we'll go ahead and buy, we'll buy a little, 5-pound bag of quinoa, which for some families might actually be bulked. Okay, 5 pounds of quinoa, that may last you for 2 months, depending on, what your primary, you know, what the food is that you would eat a lot of. And then we work our way down to the various, um, things that we use less of. So you mentioned, hey, 3 days worth of food. And I see that in retail very, here, we have a couple of stores. Azure does as well. Well, we don't brand them Azure. We brand them Farm Stand. But we have a couple of stores, and they're healthy stores. But you go in when you, especially in the later afternoon, you watch the customers that come into the stores, and they're buying just what they're going to make for dinner. I don't even think it's 3 days supply. You'll see, oh well, they go ahead and pick up a steak or a couple steaks. They pick up some seasonings, pick up a few vegetables and a bottle of wine, and they're out the door, right? That looks like supper to me, right? Or dinner, or however you know. Um, I don't think that was 3 days supply. That was tonight's dinner.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a very, that's a common lifestyle. I'm not saying it's necessarily wrong if you live in a super urban area, but you will never be able to eat as good and as with as healthy of food as if you do have a pantry.
Yeah.
And it's, at our house, heck, we have, the warehouse is right here. We could get food anytime, but we still have a pantry in our house. It's there's no, it's not because we're trying to, you know, worry about not having enough food if something were to happen. Not, as you used to put it, prepper type thing. I mean, we've got 100 truckloads of food in the warehouse next door, but it's not, so it's not that. It's the convenience of being able to, oh, well, I'm going to cook X today. Every ingredient is right there, organized and easy to access, and you don't have to worry about it. And maybe it's even a little bit more. Hey, I want to make sauerkraut today. Do I have all the spices and stuff? Cabbage is ready in the garden. Can I make sauerkraut? Do I have all the, you know, the the salt and the spices and, everything else that you'd, put in your sauerkraut ready to go? The jars, lids, you know, the thing. And so if you have the pantry, you probably do. You don't have to worry about it because this is a long-term plan. Oh yeah, I've got enough salt for sauerkraut. Yeah, I've got enough celery seed and caraway seed and all the good things that go in there. It's all right here.
Yeah, Josh and I have found that a lot. We've had moments over the last. We also have 11 children. We have 9 of them at home right now at this
Oh
point.
wow.
We also have 4 interns on the property this summer, and so our
You
dinner.
have a big family table right now.
We do have a big family. We have a lot of people that are eating at our table 3 meals a day, and Josh and I, like everybody else, have our moments where I'm just like, I don't want to cook. I don't want to deal with dinner. I don't want to do anything. And so we've had these moments where I'm like, would you just go to town and get the good old greasy takeout pizza? Like, let's just do it. And so he gets in the car and he drives to town. It's 30 minutes to town. He picks up the pizza for that many people. He pays $150, $175 for that many people to eat pizza. And maybe people can find cheaper pizza, but that's what our local cheap pizza is for the amount of people we're feeding. And then drives back the 30 minutes back to our house. And we sit there and we enjoy a cold pizza that we know is terrible for us, makes everybody feel awful by the end of the meal. And we've paid like the amount of groceries I could have bought with that and the amount of time he's now been just out driving to town and back. It didn't take very many times of doing that when we first got here to realize this is totally unsustainable. If I just bulk buy some things that I can whip together in a super fast meal, or for me, I like to can things and have meals on the shelf so that if I have nights like that, I don't have to default to something like let's run out and grab pizza. But having that stuff in the house ends up saving you so much money. That's, people like to compare grocery bill to grocery bill, but what they're not looking at is grocery bill to grocery bill, plus all the convenience food, plus all the trips out, and the gas to run to the store, run to the convenience store, or run to the fast food to grab that last minute meal. Those things all add up a whole lot. And, by reducing the number of those things, it really adds a lot of room back into your budget to be able to put back into these bulk buys.
Oh, absolutely. It is a lifestyle thing. Um, you know, of course, at our house, because of, the health issues that I have, there's no temptation to go down to the pizza place. Although in that hour we might have made pizza.
Yeah. You really can. What you can make in not very much time that's so good and so good for you and saves you so much money when you have the supplies on hand is just kind of blows anything else out of the water. So let's talk about foods that are good to buy in bulk. What sorts of foods would you suggest that people bulk buy?
Well, again, number one thing, most important part is buying the foods that your family eats. What is it that you eat? And buying it in the quantity that is reasonable for your family. So, Once you get down to things like perishables, you do have to be a little bit more careful. Don't bulk buy over what your family can eat. It's at your house. If you have 14 people at the table right now, I think that's what you just said. Um, you could probably buy a 25-pound box of cherries or anything that is only going to last a week and get it gone just fine, no problem. If somebody's only a single, two people in the household, you probably want to be careful with buying fresh produce in bulk, even though you can save good money doing that, unless you know how to can or you're willing to can that. Um, and other, perishable things. Cheese is something we see a lot of bulk buying of. People buy a lot of cheese. We probably sell, well, bulk in the sense of like 5-pound blocks rather than little 8 and 12 ounces. We see a lot of, and I'm a lot, probably $100,000 worth a week in 5-pound blocks of cheese go out of Azure.
Wow.
So it's a pretty substantial thing. And we only have like 8 or 9 SKUs of that. So it's not, you got your cheddars and mozzarellas and so on in the 5-pound blocks. But those will last just a little bit longer than if you're doing cream cheeses or yogurts, various things like that. So and of course produce. Although produce is great to buy if you can it. If you do it in season, it's obviously if you have it locally in your backyard, if that cherry tree's grown in your backyard, by all means do it, use it. But Azure also does offer a lot of very cheap produce when it comes very cheap in the sense of if you buy it in bulk and are willing to, and this year it was even more because we had some transitional stuff. Next year it'll be organic, but this year it's still transitional. So we have some cherries and we'll have some pears just a little bit later. It's been raised. This is going the third year that it's been raised under organic practices, but we can't actually certify it till next year.
Yeah.
So, it's a great way to save some money on produce, if you want to can some cherries or make some pear butter or, any of those kinds of things. So there are opportunities through Azure. There's also opportunities in local communities if you grow those kinds of foods in your community, because, I remember, we have people that kind of want to come out and glean in the orchards here on Azure Farm, and we let them. If we're not going to get it all, all picked, fine. If you guys want to, pick some cherries on your own, it's minuscule usually anyway, but yeah, or, pick up the pears that fall on the ground because we can't, food safety doesn't allow us to do that. If somebody drops a perfectly good fruit pear on the ground, or any piece of fruit for that matter, it's illegal for us to pick it up. So, and when you're picking pears, it's pretty easy to drop one every once in a while. So we end up with families coming in often and gleaning. So you might find an opportunity, but be sure if you do that you find an organic orchard or one that didn't have glyphosates under the trees and stuff. You can always tell because there's always a row, like a dead row right along the trunks of the trees. If that's the case in that orchard, don't go anywhere near it. If the grass grows all the way up to the tree trunk, it's probably a safe orchard.
Yeah.
Just as a rule of thumb.
Yeah, I always say that, like when I'm at the garden or the fruit stand or somewhere, the farmer's market, I always look for the things with little bug holes in them, because I'm like, I know that if the insects can survive on there, it's probably not been sprayed with a bunch of pesticides. Like, I want a little bit of proof there just because somebody says. So yeah, using your eyes to make some judgment. So when you're buying the bulk foods, are there are there items, you're talking about the cheese, are there items that are like give you the most bang for your buck if you're really trying to scrimp down and save money? Are there things that are just significantly cheaper buying them in bulk than buying them piecemeal, maybe through the grocery store?
Actually, most things are, but that does vary by location.
Okay.
We see out here on the West Coast, fruit, for instance, is pretty readily available, and a lot of times at not that high of a price.
Mhm.
So you can go to the fruit stand and pick up some organic peaches or whatever relatively easily. If you happen to be back, in the Midwest, if you're in Chicago, that is not going to be the case. Or, we're finding, or if you're in Florida, that's not going to be the case. At least not the same time of year. If they're getting Georgia peaches down there, they're at least 2 months before Oregon peaches are ready.
Yeah.
Um, so they're, so buying in bulk is very expensive by comparison, depending on the location and what's available locally and what's available. Um, and also in certain areas, for instance, on the Eastern Seaboard, just staples are extremely expensive.
Mm.
Oats and rice and beans, those little pound-and-a-half bags are twice as much as they are out here.
Oh, interesting.
And it's just, it's crazy. But on the other hand, out here, we find, certain things that are higher price, especially the imports. If you're going to get, pasta, for instance, or something like that, you're going to be a lot higher price out here than they are in the Eastern Seaboard. So so we find, that it's varies from one part of the country to another. But in general, most of the time, it's almost universally true that bulk buying is going to be, second to your, buying it locally from the farmer that grows it in your community. It's going to be the best way to go.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Now, one other aspect of bulk buying that I think people often overlook when they're getting started is storing their bulk food correctly. Because there are kind of do's and don'ts when it comes to storing your food. And the last thing you want to do is, save up your money or set aside some money so that you can finally make that bulk purchase and start changing over the way you're budgeting based more on those bulk purchases, and then to have the food that you've invested in spoil before you can even eat it. So let's talk about storing bulk foods. And I know, we're kind of covering a lot of here. You're talking about produce, you're talking about cheese. We haven't even touched on meat, but of course you can bulk buy meats. That's another great thing to do. But when it comes to your dry bulk foods, like your baking supplies or your grains, how do you store those to make sure they stay safe?
Well, number one, cool, dry place.
Mhm.
Um, so it's mostly about keeping them dry and keeping any insects out. There are insects that are pretty small that can fly around even in your house and lay eggs, and they create these little tiny worms that get in the bottom, or at least they're like almost look like a spider web sometimes. I don't know if any of you guys have seen those, but it's a thing. And some of them are little moths when they become adults, and some are little beetles when they become adults, depending on the standard weevil is a moth, and sawtooth grain beetle, and some of those end up being these little brown beetles that are about 2 millimeters long. They're really small, but still makes it look. They're just big enough that they look kind of bad in your food. You really don't want them floating in the top of your oatmeal. So, um, number one is you got to have it sealed tight enough. And I see in your background picture there, you have half-gallon jars with a looks like a canning lid on them or some form of a canning lid.
Yeah.
That is an amazing way to store, especially your smaller quantities of dry foods. Azure actually put together a whole jar line on purpose to help folks with not just canning, but this storage issue, because glass is probably the safest thing you can use. Um, there's nothing comes out of glass. There's no there's no plastics. There's always a concern, PCBs and various things. But glass is, that's the ultimate if you can do glass. So that's a wonderful way. We have the half gallons, like in your background there.
These guys.
Yep, those right there. We also have gallons, and then a short, squatty half gallon. It's a half gallon that's about the size of a gallon and only half as tall. So if you have a little shorter cupboards, those fit in very nicely. Um, if you're into larger quantities, a half a gallon doesn't fit 25-pound bags unless you use an awful lot of them. Buckets are nice. And at Azure, we also have a gamma lid that you can put on the bucket. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but you can use either a 2-gallon bucket, which is probably at our house and our pantry. We've only got like 5 things that we have in 5-gallon buckets. The very most common stuff. The vast majority of our stuff is in either these glass jars or in 2-gallon buckets. So all the middle range stuff, it'll hold about half of the 25-pound bag in a 2-gallon. So if you have 2 of them, you can fit a whole 25-pound in it typically. A 5-gallon bucket, usually like grain or rice or something, holds about 30 to 35 pounds typically. A 2-gallon bucket, obviously about 25-ish pounds. And the gamma lid fits on the bucket, but the middle screws out of the lid. So it's very easy to access. So you pound down, it seals, positive seal on the bucket with the outer ring of the lid, and then the lid that goes in the middle screws down, and it has a rubber seal on it. So it will keep insects and moisture and all those things from getting in, which is exactly what damages bulk food.
I will not use 5-gallon buckets anymore unless they have gamma seal lids on them, because if anybody has ever tried to open a regular bucket lid over and over again, you know that you will break every fingernail that you have in a very painful way and probably ruin your teeth and everything else in the process, because you'll get so frustrated trying to pull that thing off there. They do have bucket lid tools, and so I have some of those around, but even those are like, oh, this is such a pain. And then having those gamma seals, though, is such a game changer, because you literally just unscrew it and then you screw it back on, and it's on nice and tight, and makes this wonderful seal on there. And so, yeah, I think I'm looking at probably 15 5-gallon buckets on the other side of me here that all have gamma seal lids on them, because I'm fairly emphatic about that at this point.
Yeah, it's one thing if you want to store in the bucket and you only have to take the lid off once,
Right.
and then you can dump it in your gamma lid. So people who want to store up a little bit more, in our house we typically don't. We just store what'll fit in the bucket that is in our pantry.
Yeah.
But if you want to, you certainly, you can put those with a regular lid on them. But if you want to open them more than once, a lot of the lids, to open them easily, you have to rip the bottom part of the lid off, and then they'll come off a lot easier. If you want to take them off, as many of them as I've taken off in my lifetime, I can take them off pretty good with my fingers without wrecking my teeth and fingernails. But it is a skill that took a long time to learn. But in the pantry in our house, we don't use those. We use the gamma lid because it just makes life easier. I mean, why stress it? For they're a couple bucks. Okay, you invest in them once. I think, we got our very first ones, shoot, it has to be at least 20 years ago. And we just replaced a few of those lids just this year because some of the seals started getting loose on them, and we were worried that insects would get in. So we replaced a few of the the gamma lids on the 2-gallon buckets.
Oh, that's funny.
But
I've never really thought about the life of gamma seal, but I don't think I've ever had one go bad. I've never had one break. That's interesting. Yeah, they
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 never
really
they
do
never
last a long
broke.
time.
But after about 20 years, at least on those, the rubber seal started getting loose and it would fall down in certain places. And when you screwed
Got
your
it.
lid back on, there were certain areas that it wouldn't be in the lid. So
Right.
we started to think, yeah, there's a chance that something could get in there. It's not a positive seal anymore. So we
Yeah.
we replaced any of those um, that had the rubber starting to get loose. But that's the only thing we've ever had happen with the gamma lid. And of course, the jars, they'll pretty much last forever. And even the lids, if you're not really canning with them, especially these superb lids, those have such nice rubber on them. You put those on, and a lot of ours we use the one-piece lid,
Hmm.
just so we don't have to have a ring and a lid. But put those on, seals down on the rubber. I mean, they'll basically last forever. Your um, glass gallon jar, half gallon jar. They're beautiful. And Azure just recently, just for kicks, we started making these, and they've been quite popular. We made these little labels that 3 different sizes and I think 6 different colors, so you can color code your pantry if you want. And they're just blank. They're branded, but they're just blank, and you can just write in them whatever, long grain brown rice, whatever. And so that's kind of fun. My wife started using some of those in our pantry too, so the buckets don't get mixed up, and when the kids are cooking, they don't have any excuse for accidentally putting, baking soda in the baking powder because it's not labeled, or it's on the lid and somebody put the lid on the wrong jar.
Our big thing in our house is whole oat groats with wheat, with hard white wheat. And it's like, no, don't do that. Don't mix them, please.
Oat flour bread, that's going to be a little flaky.
It does, and baked flaked wheat in the morning instead of baked oatmeal is a very different flavor. I will have to say it. It's noticeable in the final product. So definitely label whatever you're storing so everybody can find it. And hey, guys, just as a wrap up here, going back to what David said, when you start storing your food bulk, you don't have to jump in and start storing thousands of dollars worth of food. You don't have to build like a prepper pantry. You just need to start storing the things that your family's actually eating and start buying more of it instead of buying the little packages. That's going to start saving you money really within the first purchase. And then you're going to be able to snowball that into more bulk purchases later as you keep going down month after month. And before long, you're going to have a bulk pantry of the foods your family actually eats. And it's not going to be just there for emergencies. It's going to be there to save you trips to the grocery store and money at the grocery store and all these different things. So make sure you start small and start just switching over your pantry one thing at a time that your family absolutely loves. And before long, you are going to have a nice full pantry. Start aiming for 6 months if you can. After you get going, keep building up and building up a little bit until you have about a 6-month rotation for most items that are not perishable in your household. And don't forget about bulk buying meat too. I know Azure has meat. You can find local ranchers where you can buy half a cow, quarter cow, whole cow, same thing with pigs. Find some different ways to start bulk buying things directly from producers and sellers that you trust to be doing a great job with your food, because, you know, we can't do it all. Even those of us who would love to try, we can't make it all. And I don't even know if we should be trying to do that. So, hey, David, thank you so much for your time coming in. And thank you again from Josh and I for giving us so many years of amazing groceries that we've been able to depend on. You know, my latest thing that I have started buying from Azure is bulk noodles. And I actually have 5-gallon buckets of like rotini and spaghetti and macaroni. And like we have all these different kinds. So the kids are like, what kind of noodle? They're very excited about this because historically I just go to the grocery store and buy like spaghetti. And now because I'm bulk buying them ahead, I'm like, ooh, we want this and this and that. And so anyways, you know, but that's just something I'm never going to take the time to make day after day for a special meal here and there. And so having the ability to have great options has just been such a blessing. So thank you, David. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity.
You betcha. You guys go check out Azure Standard if you haven't already, and see if it might be a fit for you and for your family. Because like I said, Josh and I have loved it and been blessed by it over the years. We'll see you soon. Okay. Goodbye.